Because my first edition of Hall of Famer or Not was such a success, I've decided to make the sequel. Now, normally sequels aren't as good as the original, but I'm going to try my darndest to make this a quality video for all of you. Without further ado, let's begin. Justin Tucker. I understand that Tucker is a fan favorite and he is the best kicker in the league, but as I stated pretty clearly in my first video, I do not personally, and this is subjective, this is my opinion, it's my video, my channel, you came here, so don't get pissed at what I say. No, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer, even though he is one of the best kickers ever, maybe the best kicker ever. He's not a full-time player, not an every down player, so he gets a no from me. Devonte Adams. If you follow my channel, you probably know the answer to this already. Yes, Devonte Adams is easily a Hall of Famer in my opinion. He's one of the best receivers ever. His numbers, career-wise, I think are a lot better than a lot of people realize. He's already top 15 all-time in touchdown catches. He just went over 10,000 yards, and just from the eye test, he's incredible. So yes, Devonte Adams, easy Hall of Fame player. Joe Staley. When it comes to offensive linemen and other positions like that, where, let's just be honest, we're not all watching offensive linemen on every single play. So a lot of our evaluations of offensive linemen depend on people who do. And while Staley was a good player by all accounts, I don't think he was Hall of Fame caliber. I think he falls just short of the Hall of Fame, so he's not a Hall of Famer. Hall of very good. Adam Vinatieri. I know I just spent about 20 seconds ranting about how kickers and punters and special teams players aren't Hall of Famers, but I am going to make an exception for Vinatieri just because it makes Brady look worse to say that he had a Hall of Fame kicker to bail him out. So yes, Adam Vinatieri is a Hall of Famer just to spite Tom Brady. And also, if you were going to make an argument for a kicker, it would be this guy, considering he has several of the biggest kicks in the history of the league, which unfortunately benefited a massive piece of shit. But the guy did his job. Kenny Stabler. This doesn't exactly follow the rules of the video, which is supposed to be players who aren't in the Hall of Fame, and Stabler is in the Hall of Fame, although it took him a while to get there, and it took him passing away really for him to get enough momentum to get in. We talk about players who played their way out of the Hall of Fame, maybe like Russell Wilson and Donovan McNabb, things like that. Well, Kenny Stabler to me almost did that with his post-Raiders career. He was terrible with the Saints, he was terrible with the Oilers. His numbers with the Raiders, especially for that era in the 70s, were really, really good. He won a Super Bowl, but I don't think I would say he was a deserving Hall of Famer. There's either one of two categories for me with quarterbacks. Either you got a shitload of rings and great stats, which are the best of the best, or you have unbelievable numbers and not a lot of rings or no rings like a Marino. Stabler, to me, his stats weren't good enough for a guy who only had one championship to be a Hall of Fame quarterback, so he's not a Hall of Famer to me. He also had a lot of premarital sex. Patrick Peterson. Like I talked about with offensive linemen, it's difficult with cornerbacks because, again, most of us aren't watching cornerbacks on every play. While I respect the fact that Peterson wasn't afraid to go up against number one receivers a lot, I swear to God, for such an elite cornerback, or this guy who's made all these Pro Bowls and had this incredible reputation, every time I watch him play, he gives up touchdowns and he gets the shit kicked out of him in coverage. So just from my own experience, my subjective experience, I think Patrick Peterson is overrated, and I would not vote him into the Hall of Fame if it was up to me. But I don't have a Hall of Fame vote, so if you think he's a Hall of Famer, you don't have to get too angry about it. Robert Mathis. This is an interesting one because Mathis's numbers, I think, are Hall of Fame worthy, but again, when he was playing with the Colts, he obviously played a lot of his career with another potential Hall of Famer in Dwight Freeney. He only had one first-team All-Pro team, so that kind of hints he was a very good player, but maybe a little bit of a compiler. I would say he will get in the Hall of Fame. I would not be opposed to him getting into the Hall of Fame. Him being busted for PEDs late in his career also might hamper his case a bit. I would not be opposed to him going into Hall of Fame, but I do not think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer by any means. But push comes to shove, I'll say yes, he's a Hall of Famer. LaMarcus Aldridge. When it comes to basketball players in these types of videos that I'm doing now, if you watch this, you should be expecting me to judge them as if the Basketball Hall of Fame actually has standards, as opposed to the standards it has, which are basically the floor. So LaMarcus Aldridge is easily going to get into the Hall of Fame, but is he a real Hall of Famer? Like if the Basketball Hall of Fame had the same strict, rigid standards as the Baseball Hall of Fame, for example, like would he be a Hall of Famer? I would say he was never a dominant player, and I'm on record saying that the Hall of Fame should be for the best of the best to ever play, and while he was a very good player for a long time, I would say he's not a Hall of Famer, but he's pretty close. Darren Woodson. I'll fully admit Darren Woodson was a safety for my time. I know that he was a member of those 90s Cowboys teams. He got 3 rings. He made 5 Pro Bowls, 3 first-team All-Pros. The accolades are there. The rings are there. Chancellor, I'm looking at his numbers, 23 career interceptions, 11 career sacks, almost 1,000 tackles. I don't know if he was good enough or long enough to get into the Hall of Fame, and I don't think his peak was dominant enough to get into the Hall of Fame, so I would say he's a very good caliber player, like a lot of these players are. But again, I'm a very strict guy when it comes to the Hall of Fame, in my personal Hall of Fame. Jeff Kent. You see, if Jeff Kent was a basketball player, he would have been in the Hall of Fame a long time ago. You look at his career numbers, when it comes to baseball players, the rap on Kent was that he was a great hitter, not a great fielder, but I do feel like, to me, it's like either or. I want a great hitter 10 times out of 10 as opposed to a great fielder, because I feel it's a long story. What I'm trying to say is that Jeff Kent won an MVP, although him winning over Bonds, who was his teammate at the time, is kind of dumb and stupid. 5-time All-Star, 4-time Silver Slugger. His OPS plus for his career is 123. He had almost 2,500 hits. The problem with Kent is he doesn't have any of those distinguishing counting records that are usually locks for Hall of Famers in baseball, like 3,000 hits or 500 home runs. I would say that if you got guys like Harold Baines getting into the Hall of Fame, then Jeff Kent's a Hall of Famer. If not for his play on the field, but for his mustache. That's an incredible mustache. So I would say yes, he's a Hall of Famer. Tie goes to the mustache. Cam Chancellor. Chancellor, feared hitter, made several Pro Bowls, big part of those Legion of Boom teams that should have been a dynasty, but they weren't. Still not a Hall of Famer. He's closer, much closer to a guy like Darren Woodson than he was to a guy like a Ed Reed or Palomalu or Brian Dawkins or one of those Hall of Fame safeties. But, I mean, if I had to play against them, I probably would have pooped my pants. There would have been a lot of poop in my pants if I had to go across the middle with Cam Chancellor, but not a Hall of Famer to me. Adrien Wilson, another hard-hitting safety who was super muscular and kicked my ass. Similar to Woodson and Chancellor, I would say that Wilson falls just short of the Hall of Fame. I look at his career numbers. 5-time Pro Bowler, made 1 first-team All-Pro, 27 interceptions, 25 and a half sacks, which is really good for a safety. But again, he didn't have any, I would say, particularly dominant season that really stands out. He didn't win a Super Bowl, so I would say another Hall of very good safety. I want to point out for the record that I don't think John Lynch should be in the Hall of Fame. Darren Woodson, Adrien Wilson, I think they're in the same tier as John Lynch, but John Lynch, I think, has gotten post-career bump from being an announcer and being the GM of the Niners, and because Lynch won a Super Bowl. So I think that Adrien Wilson, not a Hall of Famer, in my opinion, but if John Lynch is in the Hall of Fame, then I would not be upset if Adrien Wilson made the Hall of Fame. Hines Ward. When we talk about the difference between Hall of Fame receivers and Hall of very good receivers, Hines Ward really might be directly at the epicenter of that shit, because being a guy who watched most of his career, I never really felt like he was a Hall of Famer, but you look at his numbers, 1,000 catches, over 12,000 yards, 85 touchdowns, won a Super Bowl MVP, has 2 rings. To me, the touchdowns are, I would say, the deal-breaking category for me. If he had about 20 or 30 less touchdown catches, I would say no, but I'm going to say Hines Ward, yes, is a Hall of Famer, also because he was a feared blocker, and the touchdowns, to me, combined with the postseason success, give him just enough. I would say, but he again is he's on the lower tier of Hall of Fame receivers for me. But I would say yes. Mike Tomlin, another Steeler. Question is, do I think he's a Hall of Fame coach? No, I don't. I don't really know what to make of Tomlin, but it always feels as though the Steelers, while they never finish with a losing record, they always lose 2 or 3 games every year that they should easily win, and that ends up fucking them when it comes to the postseason. I've said this before, Tomlin is either the best bad coach ever or he's the worst good coach ever. I don't think he should be a Hall of Famer at this moment, but I mean, the Steelers never change their coaches. If he keeps this going and he finishes with like over 200 plus wins, then at a point it becomes undeniable. But right now I would say no, he's not a Hall of Famer, but he could be if he's able to see some more playoff success and he continues to win games at a decent rate for the next 4 or 5 years. Darren Sproles, as an Eagles fan, obviously I love Darren Sproles, but the answer is no, he's not a Hall of Famer. He didn't do enough. He came up just a little bit short in my book, no offense. Mike Allstott, God, I just got a boner from hearing that name. The grittiest and most hardworking running back since Larry Zonka, and he's not even a running back, he was a fullback. The answer, seriously, is fuck no. His numbers aren't nearly good enough to make the Hall of Fame, and that's really what it comes down to, is a numbers game. Although, I certainly would not have wanted to try and tackle him, that's for sure. Aroldis Chapman, no. The answer is no. My controversial baseball take is is that I don't think closers should really be seriously considered for the Hall of Fame. The way I look at closers very similar to special teamers in football. To me, if you were good enough to be a full-time starting pitcher, you would be a starting pitcher. Closers and relievers are usually relievers because they're not good enough to be starting pitchers to me. And Aroldis Chapman, even as a closer, and I know this is a Yankees fan because I've seen it and watched it, not reliable, not clutch in the postseason, despite the fact that he literally throws the ball 105 miles an hour. Famous woman respecter, though. Can't take that away from him. Priest Holmes and Jamal Charles. To me, there's no reason why, if Terrell Davis is in the Hall of Fame, that Priest Holmes shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. The one thing Davis has, because they basically had essentially the same career in the regular season, the difference is Davis had a lot of playoff success, won a couple rings. Holmes won a ring with 2000 Ravens, but he wasn't the dominant back that he was in Kansas City at that point, whereas Terrell Davis might be the greatest playoff back ever. But on a per-play basis, I would say Priest Holmes would be a deserving Hall of Famer, even though his career totals, when he was playing, especially with the Chiefs in the early 2000s, he was the best or one of the two best running backs in the league for a good 3 or 4 years. Jamal Charles, on the other hand, I don't know. I don't know if he was durable enough, and I know that sounds weird saying that when I just said Priest Holmes wasn't a Hall of Famer, but Priest Holmes' peak years were insane. Jamal Charles, not the same. So I would say yes for Priest Holmes, no for Jamal Charles, even though both are really good players. Ben Wallace, again, Ben Wallace is already in the Basketball Hall of Fame, but I chose this one because it really is interesting. You hear a lot of times people say, well, you want a player who plays both sides of the ball, 50-50. Well, Ben Wallace was an absolute zero on offense, but he's in the Hall of Fame because he's one of the best defensive players ever, and he was a big part of those Pistons teams that won a championship and made a bunch of conference finals in a row. I would say, in my opinion, Ben Wallace is not a Hall of Famer just because he was one of the worst offensive players ever. And in the NBA, good offense always beats good defense. That's not to say that he wasn't a good player, but I don't know. I just have a problem putting such a massive offensive liability into the Hall of Fame. That's just my opinion. Jordy Nelson, no. The answer is no, even though he was deceptively fast, is a nice way to put it. He was deceptively fast. Him and Rodgers were always on the same wavelength. His 2014 season was great, but to me, he didn't have enough great years to make the Hall of Fame. Cameron Wake. He's a player who does get forgotten about because I think he played in Miami and because he started late, but he finished with 100 career sacks, made a first-team All-Pro team, was a very good player, great player for a couple years. I would say that he just falls short of the Hall of Fame because his counting numbers for a defensive end just fall short, but if he had started in the NFL at a normal age instead of 27, I think he would be a Hall of Famer because he would have had better numbers, but at the end of the day, just short. Calais Campbell, again, very good player, triple-digit sacks, 100 career sacks. He's played forever. He's been extremely durable for a defensive lineman, but to me, his sack numbers, he's never been a dominant pass rusher, and I feel like if I'm going to vote you into the Hall of Fame as a defensive end or defensive tackle, you better have a shitload of sacks or a couple dominant seasons, and he had one season like that with Jacksonville, that during that 1 year they had in 2017 where they were magically good for a year, but I would say that no, he's not a Hall of Famer in my opinion. John Abraham, wow, a bunch of defensive ends here. Look at Abraham's numbers, 133.5 sacks, 8 double-digit sack seasons. He was a 2-time first-team All-Pro, 5-time Pro Bowler. Officially, since the NFL started keeping track of sacks since 1982, he's 13th all-time in sacks, which to me, again, it's kind of like where Cameron Wake and those other guys, and Campbell, to me, their stats weren't good enough. I would say that this guy, he might have been somewhat one-dimensional, but 133.5 sacks to me, that's a Hall of Fame caliber player, and he did it in essentially 12 seasons or so. So yes, I would say he is a Hall of Famer. Lorenzo Neal, famous for being the lead blocker for LaDainian Tomlinson during LT's best years in San Diego. Not a Hall of Famer, just because with fullbacks, it's kind of like you just don't get enough carries. But I will say this, if people are going to argue for special teamers to be Hall of Famers, then fullbacks and blockers like Lorenzo Neal and Mike Allstott, they should be seriously way more considered for the Hall of Fame because they're there every play. They're impacting the game on offense and every down player. Their stats might not exist, but I don't understand how people can argue with a straight face for special teamers and then say, well, of course Lorenzo Neal's not a Hall of Famer. He doesn't have the numbers. So I don't think Lorenzo Neal's a Hall of Famer, but I do think there's some inconsistent logic between fullbacks and special teamers there. Aaron Judge, obviously I'm a little bit biased as a Yankees fan, but I would say he is on pace to be a Hall of Famer if he can stay healthy. I mean, his OPS plus is 164. That's inner circle Hall of Fame caliber type player. He won MVP in 2022. He should have won MVP in 2017 instead of that little bitch Jose Altuve. So he should be a multiple-time MVP. His slash line, 982 career OPS. Like I said, OPS plus is excellent. But again, he did start a little bit late. He started at age 24, really age 25. So the question is, will his counting stats be good enough for him to get consideration? So it really depends. If he can stay healthy for the next 5 or 6 years and produce at or around the same level he has for most of his career, he'll be an easy shoe-in Hall of Famer. It would also help if he was able to win a fucking championship and the Yankees were able to win a fucking championship. Steve Kerr, and I cut it off, but the question talks about Steve Kerr as the Warriors coach. Of course, Steve Kerr is a Hall of Famer, even if you're not talking about just basketball Hall of Fame standards. The guy, if you win 4 championships, if you're the head coach of 4 NBA championship teams, or really 4 championship teams in any sport, yeah, you're a Hall of Famer. And he's made, 6 finals, and they won 73 games? And people will say, well, he's a product of Steph Curry and these players. And I say, well, what the fuck were the Warriors doing before Steve Kerr got there? And the thing that I'll just say this. People say Kerr rides Steph's coattails, and he's, in Mark Jackson's last year, before Kerr got there, the Warriors went from being a fun first-round exit team that literally passed the ball less. They were the worst passing team in the league. Steve Kerr and his system, his movement off-ball system, motion system, it unlocked Steph. It was a big reason why the Warriors became what they were. So yes, he's an easy Hall of Famer as a head coach. Deshaun Jackson, famous World War II history buff Deshaun Jackson. He's led the league in yards per catch 4 times. He is a great deep threat, never had double-digit touchdown catches in a season, only 58 career touchdowns, never made first-team All-Pro. Also had a problem with dropping the ball before the end zone. So to me, he's not a Hall of Famer. Hall very good. Marshall Yanda. Again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I watched every play that a guard made in the NFL, but you look at it, 8-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro, 1 Super Bowl, Hall of Fame, 2010s team, All-Decade team. To me, that's a Hall of Fame caliber player. Nick Collins. Well, obviously no. The answer is no. Nick Collins was, like I said before in my previous video, he probably was on track to be a Hall of Famer, and his injury that cut his career short is a extremely underrated reason to me why the Packers never won another Super Bowl, because their defenses were never as good once Collins got hurt. The answer is no. He just didn't play long enough, even though as a talent, I do think he was a Hall of Fame talent. Klay Thompson. Yes, Klay Thompson is a Hall of Famer. He's the second best shooter ever, 4-time champion. I know he's never been the best player on his own team, but neither was a guy like, Kevin McHale, for example. He's a Hall of Famer. The Warriors obviously are not a dynasty without Klay, who always seemed to make shots at the biggest moments to bail Steph and all the other guys out. So yes, Klay Thompson is an easy Hall of Famer. Although it would have been interesting to see him as a first option for his career. Justin Houston. Looking at Justin Houston, 112 career sacks, first team All-Pro in 2014 when he had 22 sacks. It's weird. At that point in 2014, when he had 22 sacks, he just had his 3rd straight double-digit sack season. It looked as though he was on track to be a surefire Hall of Famer. Only 1 double-digit sack season over the last 9 years. So that says he's a bit of a compiler, and he's looked about 50 years old ever since he was 20. He's like the oldest looking guy ever. I would say he's not a Hall of Famer. Hall of very good. Bryce Harper. As of today, right now, no. But Bryce Harper, he's in his prime. He's on pace to be a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. He's won 2 MVPs, 7 All-Stars, NLCS MVP, Rookie of the Year. If he can win a championship, I think it would probably seal the deal. But his OPS plus for his career is 143 at the moment. That might dip a little bit if he has a couple of years at the end of his career, but that's a Hall of Fame caliber type efficiency. OPS career over 900, nearly 400 on base percentage for his career. So yes, I would say he's on track to be a Hall of Famer. Should be a Yankee too, but Hal Steinbrenner's a cheap little bitch. Ken Anderson. I think Anderson has become most known for not being a Hall of Famer. Like, he's in a way been so underrated that now he might be a little bit overrated. But I do think it's interesting, leading the league in passer rating 4 different times, won an MVP, made a Super Bowl. Were his counting numbers enough? You look at his numbers, basically 33,000 yards, 197 touchdowns, 160 interceptions. I think very similar to a guy like McNabb or Cunningham or Boomer Esiason. If they had a Super Bowl on their resume, I think that would be enough to get them into the Hall of Fame. In my personal opinion, I would say no. His numbers individually aren't good enough for a guy with no championships to get into the Hall of Fame. But if Kenny Stabler's in the Hall of Fame, I would say Ken Anderson deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Just logically, but I would also say no, not a Hall of Famer. Drew Holiday. I've said this before, but Drew Holiday has it absolutely made. He's one of those guys that he always gets praised. He's good enough to be recognized as good, but he's not great enough to the point where he's a star player and he gets criticism when his team loses. I've never seen him get criticized criticized for anything. And again, he's a very good player. I would say that he is not a Hall of Famer. Wes Welker, this is an interesting one. I would say that Welker, to me, I don't know if his peak was good enough. The fact that he never won a championship, which isn't completely fair to him, even though he'll always be remembered for not catching one of Brady's shitty passes in Super Bowl 46. Led the league in catches 3 times. My issue, again, he was a slot receiver, didn't catch a lot of touchdowns. Julian Edelman came after him, basically replaced him. Julian Edelman won Super Bowls, was better in the postseason than Welker was. I think that's hurt Welker's reputation as well. But Welker was a great player when he was with New England and Denver, but again, had a bit of a late start. His first year in New England was when he was 26, and then the end kind of came pretty quickly after that. After 2013, had some concussions and stuff. But for that 5 or 6 year window there in the late 2000s, Welker was a great player, but I don't think he was great for long enough, and he didn't catch enough touchdowns to me to make the Hall of Fame. Andre Iguodala. Is Iguodala a Hall of Fame caliber player? To me, no. As an individual, I would say no. He has a Finals MVP, made 1 All-Star game, won 4 championships, 2-time All-Defensive Team. I mean, I'm not going to sit here in front. I don't think he was a Hall of Fame caliber player. And plus, his Finals MVP belongs to LeBron, not Steph. Belongs to LeBron, and I will die on this hill. He was a very good player for what he did. As the 4th option or whatever he was for the Warriors, he was an excellent 4th option. But again, Hall of Famers should be the best of the best, and he was not that caliber of a player to me. George Kittle. This is a tough one for me because having watched Kittle play, do I think he's a Hall of Fame caliber talent and player? Yes. He's a dominating blocker. Question is, are his numbers going to be good enough? And here we are. He's 30 years old and he has 34 career touchdown catches, which for a tight end or anybody, to me, is not Hall of Fame caliber worthy. He's made 1 first-team All-Pro. Simply put, I think his numbers individually could easily be a lot better, but he's content with helping out as a blocker. He's going to need at least a couple more monster seasons individually as a receiver, more than he's giving right now in order to make the Hall of Fame. But if you're looking in terms of breaking down a player, yes, he's a Hall of Famer to me, but he needs better numbers in the upcoming seasons, or else he's going to be one of those great players that just gets forgotten about after they retire. Barry Bonds. He's the best baseball player of all time. Yes, he belongs in the Hall of Fame, even if he did take steroids. He was already a Hall of Famer well before he began taking steroids in the late 90s. Blake Griffin. Wow, another tough one, unironically. As it stands, Griffin will get into the Hall of Fame because the Basketball Hall of Fame is easier to get into than a Kardashian. But let's see, 6-time All-Star, 5-time All-NBA, never first-team All-NBA. He won Rookie of the Year. I thought, as somebody who's old enough to remember his rookie year and how much of a phenom he was, I thought this guy's going to be one of the best 20 players ever by the time he's done playing. And it didn't turn out that way. I would say, by my own personal Hall of Fame, I would say he was a Hall of Fame caliber player before injuries hit. I would say he's a Hall of Famer, but I also thought he was going to have a better career than he actually did. But yes, I do think he was a Hall of Fame worthy player. George Seafort, another good question here. Seafort, like I said, we talk about players and coaches playing and coaching themselves out of the Hall of Fame. I think Seafort might have done that with his Carolina Panthers tenure because, again, a lot of the criticism with Seafort was, well, he basically just inherited all these great teams from Bill Walsh and he piggybacked off of that. And he won 2 Super Bowls, and there was questions that the 49ers could have been even better. And he went to the Panthers, and his first couple seasons were mediocre, and then he had a 1-15 year in 01. And I think his lack of success Carolina basically confirmed a lot of people's priors that, yeah, really anybody could have won all those games with the 49ers with all those loaded rosters. I would say Seafort is not a Hall of Famer for me, but at the same time, I don't know how you can say a guy like Tom Flores is in the Hall of Fame, but Seafort isn't, because they're basically the same situation in terms of guys who won multiple Super Bowls, inheriting great rosters, and then having a much less successful second act. In Flores' case, it was with the Seahawks, and Seafort was with the Panthers. Not a Hall of Famer, though. Julio Jones. Yes, Julio Jones is a Hall of Famer, and I'm not just saying that because he signed with the Eagles. The biggest bugaboo with Julio was that he never caught as many touchdowns as you would expect for a guy with his physical traits and his measurables. But still, when you're talking about a guy who broke yards per game records and has almost 14,000 career yards and almost 1,000, he has over 900 career catches, almost 14,000 career yards. That's a Hall of Fame receiver. On a per game basis, too, one of the best receivers of all time. So yes, he's a Hall of Famer. Unfortunately, he's not a Super Bowl champion, and he would be if Falcons did literally one thing right in the last 30 minutes of the game in Super Bowl 51. I have an interesting one, and Quan Balin. That is an interesting one. 3-time Pro Bowler, Super Bowl champ, famously had that great playoff run in 2012 with Flacco. I would say that, in my opinion, Balin would be worthy of a Hall of Fame spot. Over 1,000 catches, nearly 14,000 yards, 82 touchdowns. Per game numbers really good as well, too. I would say yes, Bolden would make the Hall of Fame for me. Clutch postseason performer. If Hines Ward is a Hall of Famer, then Anquan Bolden should be a Hall of Famer too. Corey Dillon, 4-time Pro Bowler, won a Super Bowl with the Patriots in 04 when he ran for 1,600 yards, which Brady fans just conveniently ignore all the time. Lack of weapons, no weapons, blah, blah, blah. Ran for over 11,000 yards, 82 career touchdowns, 4.3 yards per carry for his career. Not much of a receiver. I would say that he's a very good player, not a Hall of Famer. Very somewhat similar career to Marshawn Lynch, though. Start out on a crappy team that doesn't make the playoffs and then get traded and go to, another team and win a Super Bowl. Very good, not a Hall of Famer. Dwight Howard. Yes, Dwight Howard is an easy Hall of Famer. He's one of the 10 best centers of all time. I feel like this question's been asked ever since he left Orlando. Every year I feel like, is Dwight Howard a Hall of Famer? Yes, he's a Hall of Famer. Even though he's a weirdo and he gets a pass for some of the weird shit he's done off court. As a basketball player, yes, he's a Hall of Famer. Nick Bosa. Obviously, at the moment, if Bosa retired, he would not be a Hall of Famer because he wouldn't have the sample size, but there's no question he's on track to be one of the best defensive players ever. 45.5 sacks, just won Defensive Player of the Year last year, Defensive Rookie of the Year, 3 Pro Bowls. I mean, he's a monster. He's a phenomenal player. He's about to enter his prime, so there's no reason why, if he stays healthy, he shouldn't end up in the Hall of Fame. Bobby Wagner, yes, Hall of Famer. 8-time Pro Bowler, made 6 first-team All-Pros. I mean, that's whether or not you want to talk about voting being subjective or not. If you make 6 All-Pro teams, first-team All-Pro teams in the NFL as an every down player, that's Hall of Fame worthy, easily. Although I do think towards the end of his career, last couple years, kind of maybe was a slightly overrated and living off reputation a bit, but I mean, he deserves to make the Hall of Fame. Steve Smith Sr., yes, Hall of Famer, easily. Famous teammate respecter, Steve Smith. He's one of the most underrated players to me, even though he's now in the media and his face is kind of everywhere now. He was a psychopath, man. He was somebody, like, if I had to go to war, I would love to have him on my side because he was only like 5'9", really small, should not have been anywhere near as good as he was, but he was completely dominant. Over 1,000 catches, nearly 15,000 yards, 81 touchdowns, phenomenal postseason player, even though he never won a ring. Yes, he's a Hall of Fame receiver. Jared Allen, yes, Hall of Famer, 136 career sacks, led the league in sacks twice, 4-time first-team All-Pro, 8 double-digit sack seasons. That's Hall of Famer. I don't know what else you want to say. Al Horford. Horford, not a Hall of Famer, but a guy that seems to make every team he's on better, but he's not a Hall of Famer. As a LeBron fan, I've gone up against Al Horford. I say I, like I'm playing, but I've rooted against Al Horford's team with the Hawks and the Celtics and stuff when LeBron was going against them. I've never once feared Al Horford. So the answer is no, he's not a Hall of Famer, but he's a very good player. And finally, Scooby. Well, Scooby, at this point, it's still early. He's only 6 months old, but he does look to have qualities of a Hall of Famer. I will say, though, his lack of opposable thumbs could end up being a major roadblock for him. He also has a bad habit of chewing on everything that he shouldn't. Some off-the-field character concerns, but the talent is there, no question, to be one of the goodest boys of all time.